music. I can't go life without music. Oh yeah, sorry.
Our love, who can describe it? That warm embrace that sneaks up on you, a mystery, a feeling that makes you smile with your heart. Our love, who can explain it? The complete surprise that you are faced with when you don't know how you got there, but the feeling is too deep to ignore. Just when you think I won't fall for that again, you turn your back, forget about your heart, but then love comes from nowhere and gets right under your skin until you want to shout our love. You're in the middle of it, crazy love. Don't try to wriggle from it, the stuff that dreams are made of. You feel when you are wide awake. You're in the middle of it, crazy love. Don't try to wriggle from it, the stuff that dreams are made of. You feel when you are wide awake. Just when you think I won't fall for that again, you turn your back, forget about your heart, but then love comes from nowhere to hit you between the eyes until you realize that no, you don't have to worry about it. True love, look inside yourself to find it, 'cause a real love has been there with you all the time.
IJ, lovely meeting you. I do love your music, so I'm actually very curious to know, when were you first introduced to music, in particular jazz music?
Well, music in general, from the time I was born. I grew up in church, so there's a lot of music around me all my life. Jazz music, it's an interesting story. It was actually through hearing a popular song, which was When I Fall in Love, that was sung by Nat King Cole. Music in general, I grew up in church, so I grew up with music around me the whole time.
Hi, Sean J.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good. Lovely meeting you.
Same here.
So tell me, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
When were you first introduced to music, specifically jazz music?
Well, I think by the age of 15, 16 years old, that's when I was almost finishing high school. I went to this jazz club in New York City, and that's where the jazz queens and kings are. And I really I heard different instruments and different styles of singing, and I just was blown away from that time. Then I went on Google and I searched, and one of my favorite artists was Ella Fitzgerald, and one of her biggest songs was Summertime, and I love singing that song. It's one of my favorite songs.
Both of my parents, neither one of them actually played or sang music. My father was blind, so we would sit at the piano, and he loved to play little songs with me on the piano. But they discovered very young that I had a beautiful coloratura voice, which means that you can sing very high, very, very high, kind of like Mariah Carey. Most people know of Mariah Carey. So when I was very young, my cousin Scott actually asked me when I was about 7 years old to sing an original song that he wrote. And I went into a studio and I recorded for the first time. And my aunt, his mother, and my grandmother decided that I should have voice lessons.
You're mine. I'm yours, so fine.
So it was my grandmother actually who paid for my first voice lessons from the age of 8 years old. And my first voice teacher, she discovered very quickly that I had an aptitude for opera.
Jazz was it's interesting, from listening to a popular song that was sung by Nat King Cole, that was When I Fall in Love. Having grown up listening to gospel and knowing how passionate people are about singing that style or genre of music, to hear a popular song sung with similar passion, it's like, what's this? Who's? I mean, it literally stopped me in my tracks. And so then I wanted to hear other things that he had sung, and really he'd been through the whole gamut of jazz standards. So as I was searching for him, I started to learn those songs and hear them more and more, going to secondhand music stores and buying tapes then, to listen to as much as I could of his music. And then you heard other artists doing the same songs, as I started to enjoy the songs in particular, then I wanted to hear different versions of them.
Charlie, the very first experience I had with jazz actually was in my high school, and they had a jazz band, and I was still very much into opera, but they asked me to sing a song called How High the Moon. So I learned this song, and it was the only song that I knew of the jazz idiom at that time, and it was, somewhere there's heaven, no, far, somewhere there's heaven, na na na. So anyway, I did this song, and that was as much as I thought about jazz until the summer before I went to go to New York to study. I was with my Uncle Bill, and this was my very first recollection of jazz, is that he had his Linda Ronstadt albums and all of his jazz records, and he would look at the back of those vinyl records and he would say, look at this, Christine, I love this musician, and I love this Linda Ronstadt album, I wish you could sing these songs. And he was my favorite uncle. I just loved my Uncle Bill. So at that point I became more interested in jazz.
I think music is definitely plays a role in the development of society anyway, in general. I think with working with people of different ages with music, you see that impact. Jazz music, I think, because it allows for quite free expression.
So with jazz as compared to other genres, it's marked by improvisation. And that means in general that if you have, let's take a jazz standard like My Funny Valentine. If 4 musicians are playing this song, after the singer has actually done her part, then in a jazz trio or quartet setting, each musician would each take a solo. And this is what excited me so much more than anything else about making music with jazz musicians, is that I was fascinated by the fact that they could take a song that I'd heard again and again, and every single time it sounded different. It was, an entirely new version of that song. So how that applies to me and my current life here in the Caribbean is that it's enabled my ears to be very sharp. And in the case of working with my soul band, Youth Wave, I often was actually learning the songs in performance on stage. So my ear would have to pick up what was going on around me and repeat it and be right on time with it. And it just made my ears and my instincts very sharp.
And free interpretation as well. I think it can play a role in teaching people to think outside the box. It's like, okay, you don't have to copy exactly what someone else does. How else do you want it to sound? Because, like I said, when I was searching in the secondhand music stores, there were so many different versions of the same song. Because a lot of people say, oh, jazz standards, they're all the same. But really, if you listen to Carmen McRae singing something or Nina Simone singing it, that's like worlds apart. And then, of course, there's Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, any of them. They all bring their own style to it. And when I sing, that's what I like to do as well, to make sure that people hear a little bit of me in there, because I think, and it's not about me in particular, it's about communicating soul to soul, because then if you hear something that I do differently, I think it does quicken something in them, wake something up in them.
So here in the Caribbean, of course, I've been making all kinds of music. I've been making soca and dance, dancehall, reggae, jump up, and all of these styles. For me being here, it's been like an internship for 10 years, and learning all of the rhythms, because Caribbean music is marked by those specific rhythms. In Zouk, you have the da, and anyway, every single one of those things I never knew about until I came to the Caribbean. So that for me is so much fun, because I'm always learning here and have an opportunity. When you look at the history of jazz, you see that the styles that most often mix with jazz are Cuban, Latin. You have Latin jazz, you have Cuban jazz, you have Afro jazz, you have acid jazz, and you have classic, like whatever they consider the classic and the great American songbook, those types of jazz, and like the Billie Holiday and those types of voices that are smoky and things like that.
And when you communicate with somebody on that level, then it makes a difference to them. I've actually watched, when I perform in certain places, you see people of different ages. So you see like a little child that's been sort of wandering between the tables when their parents are eating dinner, and I'm singing at a hotel or something, and then you just see them stop, and then they look, and then you've seen them all night up and down, but then as you start singing, they're like, they want to actually pay attention, and you see some of their faces, and it's like, Lord, please help me, because it feels like you're really communicating with them at that time. It could be a life-changing moment for them. So it's like, I have to pay attention to what I'm doing, make sure I do it to the best of my ability, and bring myself to it so it wakes them up. So that's definitely, I think, that's what music does, that's what jazz does for people.
Besides jazz music, do you perform other genres of music? And if so, how do they relate to jazz, if they do?
I think maybe again from listening to Nat King Cole, because he sang all types of music. including popular music and jazz standards. And for a long time he wouldn't have been considered a jazz artist, but really because of him being true to himself and true to what he wanted to communicate, because he was a jazz pianist, but he sang everything. His voice was so versatile. So I think that was an inspiration to me to then say, okay, what other songs do I know, and what can I do with them? And living in the Caribbean, of course, bringing the feel of the Caribbean into the music is something that I always love to do, whether it's reggae or a bit of like bossa nova or I love Latin music, so definitely bossa nova and those kind of Latin styles, and also French music, zouk as well. Yeah. So I do attempt to incorporate those different things and fuse them into the jazz music, because a lot of in the Caribbean, when you talk to people and they say, what music do you play, and you say jazz, and they're like, oh, I don't like jazz.
But if you look at a jazz festival lineup anywhere, I did this last weekend, San Diego just had theirs in Atlanta, and they have every kind of artist, from Erykah Badu to Kim to even some local artists. So I think that every genre of music, we see more and more of these fusion of the art forms coming together. You tend to see on what they call the adult contemporary or smooth jazz, you tend to see, actually I looked that up, wow, my friends are doing good, 25 out of 30 on the chart. Anyway, so you have people like Byron Miller, who actually, I just saw this the other day, he used to play with George Duke, then he went to work with Luther Vandross, and he was the creator of the very first legendary electric bass solo, maybe the second, but he did a solo that everybody knew about on George Duke's record. And then these things changed and evolved over time. Music is constantly evolving.
I would say sophisticated people with a lot of class, they really appreciate these kind of music. But the locals here, we mostly listen to reggae and these kind of music, yeah.
In your opinion, John J., do you think it's important to fuse jazz music with other genres of music?
Well, definitely. Well, me as an artist, I try to be very different. I don't want to be like every other singer, I like to fuse. Well, when I do like gospel, I would say I would put a little jazz there. And then when I do reggae, I break it down to jazz sometimes. Or when I do R&B, I do break it down to jazz sometimes. So it's like, I try to use jazz as much as possible, because that's where, as I said earlier, that I do a lot of freestyles, and I feel like I can do what I want at the moment,
And it's like, because they have a certain mindset about what jazz is. Now, if I'm singing a Bob Marley song, my style, I can't help but make it jazz influence, but still they can relate to it because they know the music.
And I think that when you have the ear for those chords, which are a little bit more complicated than a standard major or minor chord, you're adding on an 11th and a 13th and doing different crazy inversions that I can't play, but it makes your ear listen. It's that one little thing that's like, why does that sound so interesting to me? Why is that? And anyway, it affects everybody every day, really, too.
And the other way around, I might do a jazz standard, but then I add a zouk beat to it, and then so they can dance along and think, oh, I like that song, And it's also something that I grew up with myself. I grew up in the UK, and they tended to use a lot of jazz standards in the ads on TV.
What?
Arrive on a high note. Fly Emirates. Hello tomorrow.
So without even knowing I was being introduced to jazz, that's what was happening for me. So I think hopefully I can do it the other way around, you know, for people here as well, that if they hear a style they're familiar with or a song they're familiar with but they hear it differently, then it will, you know, say something to them. So that's what I'm hoping.
Amazing.
So I always tend to say jazz influenced as opposed to just straight out jazz. We have been practicing. The band has got together a few times now, and under the musical direction of Mr. Christian Amor, and he's put a lot of work into it and making sure the scores are written and everyone knows what they're doing. And we're right in the middle of a rehearsal right now, so yeah, and it's been going well. It's been nice to hear the music, because, you know, obviously you have your songs, but then when you play with different musicians, it also brings a different flavour to it, so it's quite exciting to hear how it sounds this time. So yeah, I think we are definitely getting there. We're a few more practices in, and hopefully we'll have some things in there that people will enjoy and be able to dance along and just go on the journey with us, that where we're going with this music, you know, just to enjoy the evening. We're getting ready for the Boardwalk Jazz Festival, which is on the 31st of May. That's a Sunday, and you know, we want everybody to come out and support us. You know, we're hoping that it will be a very good night. We've got other artists playing too. There's Christine Gordon and Kelly. So I think there'll be something for everybody. So please come out and support the work the hard work that's been put in by Mr. Arundel to get it all together. It's just amazing that he's bringing this type of music to the island, and, you know, on a regular basis, because that's really, it's almost like you're inoculating people with it. That's how you know, we're gonna get used to it, because any type of music, it was once new. So we might say, oh, we love reggae or we love soca, but at some point that was new music. So, you know, and we hear it more and more. If we hear jazz more and more, then we'll get used to it and we'll have our own interpretation of it. So yeah, so please come out on the 31st of May at the Boardwalk Jazz Festival. We look forward to seeing you there.
On May 31st, that's the last Sunday of this month, there is a jazz festival on the boardwalk here, and I've heard that you've performed there many times before.
Yes, definitely.
Good. So I'm kind of curious, because I know that you fuse different genres of music, right?
Yes, I do.
So I'm wondering, how do you feel about jazz music and also the fusion of other music forms with that genre of music?
Well, definitely jazz music, to me, it's like freestyle music. You know, you do what you want, whatever you feel like at the moment. You know, it's all about a feeling.
And I think, you know, life is a little bit like jazz. Like, you just kind of have to go with it, right? And ever since I got to the Caribbean, it's just been one big improvisation after the other. Like, I don't even know exactly how I got here, but I just know that it's been fantastic. And in terms of my own music, I consider myself a neoclassic soul jazz artist. That would be something along the instrumentation of like what Erykah Badu would play with, or say D'Angelo, that urban kind of Jill Scott feeling where there's a Rhodes, a bass, you know, drums of course, and a guitarist. And with that music, you have a lot of space for the voice to float and for all the instruments to have a conversation. And that music very much excites me live.
What do you feel inside of you at the moment, you know? And sometimes I mix it up with gospel music, and I do sometimes rock and jazz music, you know? It's music is everything to me, so I just use it as much as possible. Yeah, the music is life.
Tears in my eyes burn, tears in my eyes burn, while I'm waiting for my turn.
The greatest lesson I ever took away from my experience with jazz and soul musicians was to let the beat come to you. And I think that's important with life. You can't push anything, you can't force anything. The worst thing you want to do, like in a race or in music, is to like have a false start and be in the middle of nowhere with no band behind you, and you started, and where's everybody? Or you sing it too fast. If you sing behind the beat, they'll be like, wow, man, that was groovy. But if you're too fast, they're like, yeah, you're rushing it. You gotta take your time with life and with jazz, because, you gotta let the beat come to you. That's what I think. So for me, I feel very, very honored to be a part of the Youth Waves band, which has stayed together for 29 years, and that's a big deal. And because of that, I get to go on the road and do the carnival and see the pride and the culture that people love here. They're so excited and proud of carnival time. And it's very exciting to see that people take to the streets. And it's literally like that Lionel Richie song. People dancing all the streets, feel the rhythm in their feet. Life is good, it's wild and it's sweet. Let the rhythm play on. I mean, to me, you cannot ever experience something so exciting as being a part of that. The first time I did the carnival route, it was absolutely unforgettable, and I'm not sure that I can't even imagine something that would make my heart pound so much. Now, when we have like the Heineken Regatta, 4 days of music, wonderful festivals, and it really plays a part, of course, in our island, which is about tourism, bringing people to this beautiful paradise of ours. And I think that the musicians that are here, I've been so happy to share and make music with so many local artists here, and that's what makes it exciting. And to be able to, for example, create new combinations and make different conscious conversations with each of these artists has been what keeps me here. To be able to jump on a boat, go to Anguilla, hear some great live original music at Binky's, and hear the True Intentions band, or hear Omari Banks, or great British Dependency. These are all amazing, and of course my beginnings were in St. Bart. So each island has its own unique flavor, and it's very exciting to be a part of that fabric. I can't really imagine life without it. Life without music, I can't go.